In wildlife photography, we are often facing the problem that we are not having enough light on the sensor of the camera, and this means that we need to increase the ISO, and therefore we also introduce more noise. The image's dynamic range will get worse, the colors will not look as nice anymore, and we also lose details. In theory, the solution to most of the situations is quite easy. We just buy a faster lens that lets in more light, but I don't think I need to say why this is not always a very feasible option. There are, however, several shooting techniques that we can apply to increase the image quality even in these low light situations. And from my experience, what I have also seen during teaching photography workshops, these techniques can sometimes be more important than a lens that is just one f-stop faster. So in this video I want to share my most important tips about wildlife photography in low light with you, and hopefully you can also come home with cleaner and sharper images. I will discuss two specific pictures with very different situations afterwards, but before I want to give you some general tips about low light photography, again especially for wildlife. The first one is you need to realize that it's the lack of light on the sensor that is giving you a kind of degraded image quality and not the high ISO setting per se. Why is this distinction important? Well, I have seen people that have told me that they don't like the ISO performance, let's say over 3200 ISO on their camera, so they limited the ISO to 3200, and when it was a bit too dark they just underexposed the images, and they told me that they will just lift the shadows or lift the whole image afterwards in Lightroom or Capture One, and this is not a good idea. Of course, try to keep your ISO low if possible, but not by underexposing. In fact, if you want the best image quality, it's sometimes good to expose to the right, so actually overexposing them a bit and bringing them back in post. But with all cameras that are on the market at the moment, pushing the image in post, so making it brighter in post, will give you a worse image quality than if you directly expose the image correctly in camera, even if this means increasing your ISO directly in the camera. The second thing that is really hurting image quality in low light is cropping. And here it doesn't matter so much if you have an 18 or a 45 megapixel camera. If you're in this high ISO range, cropping is a really bad idea, because you really emphasize the noise more, because you zoom more in on the noise. So here I have several tips for you. The first one, if you can, just get physically closer to the animal, often not possible. The second tip, I've seen people that are not using their potential of the zoom lens. They shoot with 400 millimeter on a 200 to 600 and crop in post. In these situations where it's really low light, I would be extra careful that I use the maximum of what my lens provides. Finally, the third point is that in some situations it can actually look good, in my opinion, to include just a bit more of the surroundings and not crop, especially if you have this blue hour, like half an hour after sunset. I think it can help to actually bring the mood to the image. With this out of the way, let's discuss two examples. The first one is of a mammal, a pretty large mammal. It's a moose that I was photographing in Scandinavia. And you can see the raw file here. First of all, you can maybe see that I'm slightly guilty of doing the mistake that I just mentioned before, because if you look at the histogram, it would have had some room to push it more to the right. It's not terribly underexposed, but it could have been a bit brighter. Anyway, if we look at the EXIF data, I was shooting my 600 millimeter at f4, so the maximum aperture. I used 6400 ISO and 1/50th of a second. Now, I've had some people in the past that told me with 1/50th of a second you cannot get sharp images, your shutter speed is way too long, and I think this image proves that it's just wrong. If you zoom into the image, it's perfectly sharp, it has some noise. But especially with the modern telephoto lenses that have really good image stabilizer, you can absolutely shoot shutter speeds like this, and I have shot even longer shutter speeds with no problem. There is just a few things that kind of need to align. First of all, your animal should not move, and this is sometimes an advantage with rather big animals, for example moose or deer, that sometimes they often just stand there and don't move at all, and then you have a good chance to just expose a bit longer. Another example is owls in a tree. Sometimes they don't move for literally seconds and you can expose very long. The same is also for herons that are basically standing in a wetland or in a field, looking down and waiting for a frog or a mouse to move. These situations you can also use a rather long shutter speed with no issue. The other thing is obviously you are not allowed to move in this time. As I mentioned, new cameras or new lenses with good image stabilizer help. The other important thing is to have a stable shooting position. So in this situation we were taking pictures out of the car window, and this obviously helped because I could just put the lens basically on the window or on the door and it was more stable. Otherwise you can try to have an improvised tripod, but just by using your camera bag, using a branch that you find in the forest, or even leaning yourself towards a tree trunk can actually help to get a more stable position. The last part that is very important is don't expect every image to be perfectly sharp. So maybe only 1 out of 3 will be sharp, but if the animal is not moving much, that's enough. Just basically fire a burst of shoots and select after and vary afterwards how many sharp ones you have. Just be sure that you have enough pictures that at least one of them is sharp. And here with the mirrorless cameras, it really helps to use the electronic shutter. Even if your camera has a bit of slower readout, here the subject is not moving, so you should be fine with a slower sensor readout, and it just helps to avoid camera shock. The second situation is taking pictures in low light in flight. Obviously I would not do this in a very low light situation as the image of the moose that was taken at like 3:30 in the morning. But I had one of this spotted nutcracker in the forest. It was not a very dark day, slightly overcast, but not extremely dark. But because it was in a spruce forest, I still didn't have a lot of light in the sensor, especially since I wanted a short shutter speed for freezing the action. And here you will obviously say the trick of before doesn't work very well, because you need a shorter shutter speed because here the animal is moving much faster. And you're completely right. In some situations you can try a panning shot, but from my experience this works much better with like herons, with seagulls, with other seabirds as puffins or something, but it just doesn't work so well with songbirds just because they fly more erratically, they accelerate and decelerate more. So here I find it hard to do a proper panning shot with, let's say, 1/50th of a second. However, what can sometimes work is if you try to pan as good as you can basically decrease the shutter speed a bit. So maybe instead of a 2,000th of a second, you could get away with 1,000th of a second, and this would already give you one stop of better ISO performance. But I need to admit this is not always possible, especially if the bird is like just landing in front of you or just taking off and you cannot move the camera in the same speed as the bird is moving. In these situations, you just need to keep your short shutter speed. What can you do then? To be honest, at some point, maybe just try another day when you have more light, another situation. Not all situations are really good for action photography. This is unfortunately the truth, in my opinion. You need to get used to that and then maybe think what else you could do that could give an interesting image. Even though I was trying to apply the tricks that I just mentioned before, you can see that in both situations I was still at 6400 or even 12,800 ISO. So noise is still an issue, and if we zoom in at the image of the nutcracker here, you can see that it's nicely sharp, the focus is at the right spot. We don't have a problem with motion blur, but there is quite some noise. So what I recommend using is like a AI-based denoising software, because for me that has really been a game changer, and I can do so much more action photography in, let's say, more or less low light situations. As I mentioned before, there is a limit of what you can do, but this software is just kind of expanding our limit. And you can see the result that I got with DxO Pure Raw 4 here. I think it looks very good. I mean, we still have a lot of details, basically all the details that we had before. I don't really see that we lost details, but the noise is basically gone. And this has really been a game changer for me. What I also like with the newer versions of DxO Pure Raw 4 is that you also have this preview option, which is nice because you can see how you change the parameters, what it affects, but you don't need to do it. You can also do a batch processing with fixed parameters for all the images, and this is my preferred preferred way to work. I just, after I was shooting a whole day, I sort my images, and the ones I want to edit that are shot in high ISO or low light situations, these images I just run through DxO Pure 04, usually with the same settings, and then I have a good starting point with a clean image for editing them after, and then I can also print them in a big format if I want to. Another option that you can use is Topaz Photo AI. It just works a bit different because in Topaz Photo AI, from my experience, you need to work a bit more with the sliders, but you also have the option that you can do a bit more different things. You can also do a bit more sharpening if the image is slightly blurry. And I tried both programs with this moose picture here, and you can see that both applications do a very good job. In the end, it's personal preference, what suits your workflow more. Both of the applications, DxO Pure 04 and Topaz Photo AI 3, have a free trial that you can download. I put a link below, and at the moment there are some very attractive offers because of the Black Friday, and if you're interested to buy it over this link there, you would just support my channel a bit. I hope you learned something useful today for taking better pictures in low light situations. I highly encourage you just to try it, also to find out in which situations can you lower the shutter speed and how far can you push it. Basically, it really depends on the lens, on your subject, also how steady you can hold the lens. So just give it a try and let me know in the comments if it worked for you.